anyways, I've learned for me sitting helps. And as a side note, if you're wondering why I'm wearing a ring, this is actually, it's called an Oura ring. It monitors my health all day and all night and does a sleep test on me every night. Interesting idea as well. I also speak on men. I have a talk called Men Navigating Everything. If your church has Right Now Media, my entire program is on there for you. And then I speak on sex, porn, dating, and I have a talk on media I did for students today, and I'm half done research for a new talk on that. I want to be upfront. The goal tonight is to equip and empower you to be better parents, whether that's moving you a little bit along wherever you are on that kind of continuum. And I hope that the strength of tonight's talk is in its simplicity. As a side note, I'm married with 2 kids. My wife's name is Dawn. This is our 25th wedding anniversary this August. My daughter Zoe is at a school called Western in London, Ontario. She'll be transferring to a school called McMaster. She's had a really hard 2 years of COVID at school and has decided to transfer. And my son Ben is in first year at a school called Queens. So we are like without kids, which is the most interesting season for us as parents. So some ground rules. Please be a good learner. I do think sometimes as Christians we're great listeners. We smile, we say amen, but are we good learners? Do we take something from every sermon, every teach we ever hear? You're welcome to take notes. You can take pictures of any slide that you want as well. There are some versions of this online, and I think there are some people online, and this you can actually watch again later if you want. Find your light bulbs because you're all different. You are different people, different parents, and you have different kids. Have opinions. I always say I would rather you have a different opinion than me than have no opinion at all. I like when the Bible says iron sharpens iron. Like it's okay to have some good discourse and think through things. And I just say you can do this. Parenting's hard and it's tough, but we can do it. I love the Home Depot slogan, you can do it, we can help. Right? Don't do it alone. And I kind of say this as an overarching theme, no shame and no condemnation tonight. When I challenge you to be better, it was Maya Angelou who once said, do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better. It's not about shame, it's not about condemnation, it's about how do we be the best we can for our kids. No cookbook approaches, no cliches, no poor theology, no, the 3 things you need to do as a parent. And I want to tell you how I got to navigating everything. The original title was just everything. That was really ambitious, I have to be honest. But I realized as a speaker, I wanted to bring more content from a parenting standpoint, but it really arose from one conversation. I finished speaking on mental health, and as I do after every talk, I went out to my booth. I have a booth at the bottom of the stairs, and I go out after and I chat. And it's some of my favorite times. And a father came up and said, Brett, can I ask you a question? I'm like, yeah. He said, so I got a 16-year-old daughter. How do I talk to her about sex? Great question. I went to answer, but before a word came out of my mouth, he said, oh, wait, by the way, she hates me. Go ahead. And I said, what? And he said, no, forget about that. How do I talk to her about sex? I'm like, sir, forget about sex. What do you mean she hates you? Because that's everything. If your daughter hates you, you will not be speaking truth to her about sex. And we had a quick conversation and he left. And on the way home, I realized that I'm a topical speaker, but I don't have anything foundational for parents. So I began to do what I do. I'm a researcher. I love research. So I'm a year into my new media talk. I've read 40-something books, I think. I read, I research. So I did the same with parenting, and I was floored. There were 75,000 different parenting books at my disposal. There are 10 parenting books coming out every single day and growing. And that's a lot. Like if you read one parenting book a year, you would read 18 until your kids graduate high school. And then I just want to acknowledge some kind of things. So this is called stock family syndrome. If you know the name Reggie Joyner and Carrie Nieuwhof, they have a book and they talk about how perfect pictures paralyze parents. I don't like alliteration, but look at these photos. Has this ever been a photo in your life? Everyone's smiling at the same time, facing the camera. Look, these ladies are wearing hats. Everyone's holding hands, wandering into the forest. It doesn't happen like that. You notice they're all 2 kids and 2 parents? So yes, we have a lot of nuclear families, but we have a lot who are not. And then those pictures paralyze parents because you don't look that way. Single moms, we have a lot more single moms than single dads. That's another conversation for another day. Grandparents raising children is now statistically significant. It's between 1% and 3% of all Canadian children are being raised by grandparents. I'm at a talk, 75-year-old grandparent comes up. He says, Brett, I'm raising my 3 teenage grandkids. And he gave me kind of the spiel of what was happening. And he said, can I ask you a question? I'm like, sure. He says, what is Snapchat? Even by the way he said it, I'm like I'm 50. I still struggle saying that. I turned 50 over COVID, but I'm 50. My kids are 18 and 20. I'm generations from them. Picture being 75. Adoption, foster kids, blended families, extended families, and every one of us are spiritual parents to every kid who, especially as the weather gets warmer, will wander through your home, play basketball outside with your kids, and everything else. We're not even talking about disabilities, mental health struggles, and other things. So the world your kids are growing up in today is different than the world you and I are growing up in. It's very different. On top is my children and when they experience things. In grade 1, the iPhone came out. Remember that? iPhone 1, back in the day. That changed technology. In grade 1, my daughter's best friend's parents got divorced, and it was really tough. It was in grade 2, my daughter was on a trampoline, and one of her friend's older sisters struggled with self-harm. And I had a conversation with 3 grade 2s about self-harm. Very innocent, but had to address the conversation. My son saw his first porn image on my computer during care groups, small group tribes, whatever your church might call it. I'm the one people bring in to not have that happen, but it's not if you see porn, it's when. And Canadian average is around grade 3. This is not searching it out, this is it just pops up on something. Music began in grade 4. My daughter came home from school and said, "Dad, can I buy a song?" And I remember she said, I said, "Well, which one, honey?" She's like, "I don't remember his whole name, but the first part of his name is Little." And I said, "Oh, honey, I don't know how many littles will be coming into our house, especially at that age." Dating began in grade 5. Now, here's what's interesting. Who pushes kids into dating in grade 5? Because it's not other kids, it's actually adults. We have a local dance for below middle school in our town, and it's all chaperoned by parents. There's no songs with language. It's kind of a fun thing. But parents, I remember people posting on Facebook, "Hey, we'll rent a limo. My son can take your daughter." It's they're in grade 5. What do you mean a limo? What on earth are you talking about? Social media then began, and drugs are found in my kids' school every year since. On the bottom, these, from here to here, are my friends' children. Bullying, anxiety disorders. Some of you, like me, really struggle. Picture being 15, and then picture being in grade 2. How do you even comprehend what's going on? Eating disorders in grade 3, depression in grade 4. I've been invited to an elementary school for probably, I think I'm up to 20 years now, every year, at least once, for a young person who's taken their life. And schools call and say, "Can you come in today?" And I'm like, "I'm not a crisis team." And then sexting, and if you don't know that language, that's people, usually girls giving, usually guys asking, not always, where they send a topless, naked photo back and forth. Then we hit what I would call middle school. And I always say, that should give us pause. Then we hit middle school. Peer pressure, self-esteem, alcohol use, phone addiction, and peer attachment. Then we hit high school, alcohol and drug abuse, the depressed girl and the adrift boy. Now there's an author named Leonard Sachs, and he has used those terms. They're heavy generalizations. I think I might agree, though. Busyness becomes the bane of our existence, desperation for peer acceptance, and extreme stress. The adrift boy is the new concern I'm seeing. There are books like Boys Adrift by Leonard Sachs, Boy Crisis, thick books looking at why do guys in their late teens, early 20s have very little purpose today? And it is a growing issue. I probably have one parent a night who says, my kid's 22, lives in our basement, works 5 hours a week at Wendy's. There's just an interesting conversation on that. So are you prepared? Are your kids prepared for the world they go into every day? And many of these are new changes to society, and things keep changing and shifting. So I acknowledge I'm still a topical speaker. I still speak on a lot of bigger issues, but tonight I really want to walk through, I'm going to call these the foundations of parenting. Now, these are not the only foundations of parenting. Just when I read all of these books, what I found these were things that we didn't often talk about. I kind of went through with my wife and I said, what are things that no one ever addressed to us that we think were really, really important? Number one is, what is parenting? Because if you don't know what it is, how on earth do you know how to do it? Time. What does spending time with our kids look like? One study says the average North American father spends 8 minutes from Monday through Friday with their children. 8 minutes. And this is a peer-reviewed study. This isn't just someone threw something together. It's pretty interesting. Communication, what does it look like? And then discipline. And as a bottom, this is like a foundation. I think true Christian faith should touch all aspects of our life. But I think we do need to be strategic and intentional in all aspects of our parenting. So let's get into it. What is parenting? It's an interesting question. And so I posted on my social media, like, hey, what's the goal of parenting? Within minutes, a person wrote me and said, the goal of Christian parenting is to raise godly children. Now, I wrote the person back, they never replied to me, because all I wanted to know was, what do you mean by that? There's a lot of Christianese in that. Like, is Christian parenting, other than wanting our kids to love Jesus, is Christian parenting different than regular parenting? If you have a 2-year-old who hasn't slept through the night, my daughter didn't, is swaddling a kid or letting them cry, is that a Christian thing or is it a parenting conversation? But they never wrote me back, so I don't know. Number 2, trophy child. Our job as parents is to raise children who love Jesus and leave home as responsible adults. Well, you could just do a full stop on that right there. We prepare them for a lifetime of following Christ, working hard, being married, and raising a family. Most people wrote me, and I'm talking hundreds, to raise happy kids. And I would say I disagree. What does happy mean? If you're not happy, like happy is an emotion. Happy shouldn't be a target of whether our kids are doing well or not. And then I read a book that actually rocked my world, because what Trophy Child said in another line was, they will not be with me forever, so I prepare them accordingly. In my life, I call these stop quotes. I stop reading because this is truth. Your kids will not be with you in the way you have them now forever. There's weight to that quote. It was just before COVID, I was out at the One conference up in Edmonton, and Neil and Cheryl from Family Life Canada had me in to speak, and there was a line they used that parents are to teach our children to live without us and with God. And I kind of like that. I'm still thinking through it. It's an interesting thought. So as a faith-based person, I first look at what does the Bible say, right? What do the scriptures say on parenting? And if you know who George Barna is, right, George Barna, they do research. They say, if you've sought spiritual guidance in parenting, you might have been surprised to discover how little instruction God gives us in this regard. Now, I've had many people write me, hate mail, and say to me, I can't believe you say the Bible doesn't talk about parenting. And I write back and say, you know, the Bible doesn't talk about parenting because parenting didn't exist back then in the verb use of it now. The word parenting is 100 years old, just like the word teenager was created in the 1950s as a marketing conversation. And then people don't really, like the Bible doesn't talk about Teslas either, right? It doesn't talk about the iPhone. Like we can figure out what to do. It mentions children, but the idea of parenting, don't forget, kids kind of went from being children and then married at, 12 and a half to 14. The adolescent stage didn't really exist, and today's kind of delayed adolescence into the 30s for sure didn't exist. Now the Bible talks about who we're to be as people. And if you become who the Bible calls you to be, I think you'll probably be a good parent. And I mean, of course, there's verses on children. I mean, Deuteronomy, teach them to your children. Now, the actual language is not the word teach. It's actually the word inscribe, which is like carve with a knife, a little more oomph to that. Proverbs 22:6. Now, almost every book from a faith perspective used this as its cornerstone, but most of them concerned me because they all use this verse as a promise. And Proverbs are not promises. Proverbs are wisdom. Proverbs are adages. It's not, oh, I've never had a clap to that. Thank you very much. But it's actually a really big deal, because here's the problem that we see. There are parents in the church who are great parents, who have kids who go off a bit. And then people say, well, they look at me and say, well, you didn't train up a child in the way you should go. Most parents, I think, who are good parents have good kids, but not all. There are some horrible parents who have wonderful kids. So I taught in a school where a lot of my kids' parents were gang members. And so one day, I'm sitting with one of my best students. She has a 99.9% average in grade 8. I said to her, can I ask you a question gracefully? She goes, yeah. And I knew her dad. Interesting having a leader of a gang come in. Side note, probably the best parent I've ever had come in, which is the weirdest thing in the world to say. I'm in my first interview with him. He sits down and he says, you know who I am? And he goes, oh, okay, that sounds like a threat. And he paused. He goes, do you know what I do? And I'm like, yeah. And he said, will you work with me so my daughter never walks down my path? And he said, anytime there's any issue, this is my phone. This is not a phone from work. This is my phone. You will get me. There will never be repercussions to you. If anything ever happens, if she fails, please work with me. Me and my wife do not want her to join the gang and walk. It was the best parent I've ever had, which is the weirdest thing in the world. Anyways, the daughter, I said, how do you have such an average? And she just said, I've just chosen not to walk down this path. Colossians and Exodus are very authoritarian. Do what parents tell you, honor your father and mother. And Proverbs 13, can we say put a pin in that? We'll address that in discipline in a few minutes. So parenting stages, I don't know if you would agree with me, but it's physical exhaustion more when they're younger and then more mental, emotional exhaustion as they get older. And some of you might just say it's just exhaustion, right? It doesn't really matter what age and what stage. Now, some of you know Andy Stanley, the pastor preacher. This is actually Andy's wife, Sandra, and I really like this. Discipline years, training years, coaching years, friendship years. Now, do not get hung up on words. You discipline throughout, you train throughout, you're a coach throughout, and you're a friend throughout. Have you ever read those emails? Like, you're not a friend, you're a parent. It's like, well, you better be both. And you better understand what it means to actually be both. And there's no, if you have a 6-year-old, they're not an incomplete next stage here. And if you have a kid who plays rep anything, sports, dance, gymnastics, whatever, they usually walk through this a little quicker. Usually rep sports kids. My son was a AA baseball player. Whatever it is it the travel? Is it the being with other kids? I don't know, but they move through quicker. Now, if you spent time ever Googling parenting stages, you would soon be given, because of algorithms, parenting styles. Now, there's some names I'm going to give you tonight. You're more than welcome to add them on Facebook while we're talking or just write it down. But if you don't know the name Allison Schaefer, you should. Allison's Canadian. If you watch a number of the Canadian news shows, she's often the resident mom. Schaefer, Schafer. Now, she says what you'll find is that there's a lot less parenting styles than names to describe them. And I agree. Before I give you some parenting styles, let me show you and we call these paranoid parenting styles of the 1990s have caused, and I wonder if you would agree with me. Tim Elmore says, as a side note, every single book I promote tonight is on one Amazon link at the very end of the talk, so you can just take a pic of it and you can find them all. From this decade, the 90s, adults began to believe that our world was less safe than ever and kids needed oversight or direction at all times. It caused 4 things. Number 1, our kids began feeling entitled to special perks because we said that they're special. You know, there's a soccer club in Toronto that doesn't keep score. You know who keeps score? Everybody. Every parent, every kid, and they all get the same ribbon, but they all know who wins and who loses. Kids began to feel unsafe, afraid, and even paranoid because of their parents' behavior. Kids began believing that they were fragile and could not handle adversity. And kids began embracing the narrative that the world is full of evil people who could harm them. Anybody think we're there today? Because I think this is a profound kind of conversation he writes. So parenting styles, I did my first YouTube video on it. I think I had 54. I'm at 130 and growing. We're not walking through all of these. The blue ones are the main ones. The stars are the ones you should be. You are not just a Christian parent. Of course, we want our kids to love Jesus, but that's one aspect of parenting. The top left is one of the biggest, called attachment parenting. Now, some of you are thinking, attachment parenting, isn't that like breastfeeding much longer than other parents and co-sleeping? And I'm like, that's Dr. William Sears, not what I'm talking about. Attachment Parenting by Gordon Neufeld, Gabor Mate. Gordon Neufeld's from Alberta, if I'm correct. Leonard Sachs, most authors, is this: attach with parents, then attach to your peers. The problem today is called peer attachment, where kids are looking for unconditional love and acceptance from each other, and each other cannot give them that. Because each other will dump each other at a given moment's notice because that person they think is cooler or that person is. And conscious parenting, names like Tina Bryson and Dr. Dan Siegel. If you're going to follow some tonight, follow Dr. Dan Siegel, one of my favorite online. They have a book, The Power of Showing Up. And they say that kids need, and it's alliteration again, I apologize. If kids feel seen, safe, and soothed, they will feel secure. The secure attachment, again, is what you want. You want this safe haven your kids come home to and go back into life, and they come back to recharge, back to the safe haven, and then back into life. I really like that. Helicopter parenting, like parents hover and then swoop in. I heard one recently, Black Hawk military helicopters. There's the movie Black Hawk Down from years ago. There's now Black Hawk parenting. Parents swoop in, blow everything up, and then fly away. I find that really amusing. But the idea of bulldozer rescue, it's the idea of pushing all the negative out of the way so your kids have this perfect path. Overparenting. If you remember one thing tonight, the more we overfunction, can you guess what happens to our kids? They underfunction. It is the issue of the day. The more we overfunction, the more we underfunction. Side note, that goes into your marriages, that goes into your relationships, it goes into your work relationships. Adler in parenting is Alfred Adler. It's funny, I'm actually back in school taking my master's in counseling psychology right now, so now I actually know who he is. But he has this idea that people have these needs to belong and to feel significant. I get that. I have pages and pages and pages. At the bottom, Humpty Dumpty parenting. We're so worried our kids are going to fall off the wall and be broken and never be able to be put back together again. And groundhog grandparents is a new one. This is where grandparents pop up their heads, and this is how it was done when we were younger, and then they pop their heads back down. And things do change. So here's an easy question. Anyone confused? You're like, what on earth am I supposed to do? So here's it put very simply. There are 4 parenting styles. That's it. Everything I just said to you can be plotted on this graph. Everything. This is love and support, like warmth. Do you love on your kids, right? Do you hug them, tell them you love them, support them, all this stuff. And this is control and demand. Now, authoritarian is where we don't give a lot of the love and support, but we demand a lot. This is what we're to be. And again, I'm a fan of peer-reviewed research and research. Every study is the same. Authoritative parenting is the one you're supposed to be, where we love and we ask a lot of our kids. Now, if you think of what's in that word, it's the word authority. Think back to the father who had a daughter who hated him, right? It's that influence that's actually missing. But every study is the same. We're to be authoritative parents. Now, I would encourage us not to overparent. This quick analogy or just thought is do life with, not for. And I actually break this out farther. Do life for, then with, then let your kids do life. I think of this as if a kid's riding up, this is not strangling a kid, but it's hands on, hands near, hands off. I think of young kids, middle schoolers, you're near them, and then kind of hitting into grade 10 and 11 with high schoolers. I'm going to give you 3 quotes. Now, I mean, as speakers, someone once said at a conference, you're not supposed to use many quotes, and I'm like, well, I'm going to do that. So here are a few. Again, these are probably my 3 favorite books on parenting. Leonard says, many college faculty and staff report a noticeable fragility amongst today's students. Some describe them as teacups, beautiful but liable to break with the slightest drop. House of Cards, not the Netflix Kevin Spacey TV series, but the idea of if one card falls, everything collapses. I hear the word these days, drowning. Last week, another Christian school I was at, grade 6 kid, twice in my conversation said, I feel like I'm drowning. Drowning. Overfunctioning in parenting simply means doing too much for our children, intervening and removing common struggles that they may experience in their day. When we insulate, we could call it bubble wrap our kids from consequences, normal consequences from actions. We fail to prepare kids for the future that awaits them. And an amazing TED Talk, if you don't know the name, Julie Lythcott-Hames. She is I forget if it's an dean of admissions or whatever from Stanford. She has a great TED Talk, though. Here's what she says. Why did parenting change? From preparing our kids for life to protecting them from life, which means they're not prepared to live life on their own. She calls young adults today not quite fully formed humans. It's an interesting statement, but when you begin to look at overparenting today, it's quite true. I'm speaking a few years ago. I always have to say a few years ago now. It's like this 2-year abyss of COVID and then before that. But I was speaking and a person comes up and they said, you can never tell anyone what university I'm from, but do you know that? So she said, I'm the dean of admissions for this one, large university in Ontario. I'm talking 50,000 people. She said, we now have a program for first years, but really first year guys. And I'm like, for what? She says, we need to tell guys to shower. I burst out laughing. She said, I'm not kidding. She said they're blowing through their meal plan by the end of September because they think it's an all-inclusive resort. She said without mom or dad by their side, they're not functioning. And so we need to tell them the most basic things in life. So let's play a quick game. You might be an overparent if you. No elbowing the person beside you, please, if we go through these. Number 1, you might be an overparent if you drive to your kid's grade 2 class each day to cut their food into pieces at lunch. True story from a teacher around the corner from my house. You drive to your kid's school and walk them to the door of their classroom. So I taught grade 8. I had a mom who was, and I'm not saying anything bad about height, but she was the same height as the kids. And so when I looked at my class, I couldn't tell if it was her. She would get in line and come upstairs, sneak upstairs to the classroom. And then one day I see her, she's saying to her son, it's hot, and she's starting to take off his coat. This is grade 8 again, grade 8. And then she has a meeting with me that day, and she says, so my son's being bullied. Do you have any idea why? Yes, I do. So we made Kiss and Rides. This was the beginning of Kiss and Rides when I was in education. And it's funny because if you look at the beginning of Kiss and Rides, it's not to be nice to you as parents. It's to get rid of you. We put pylons up, like you come in, and then we're like, welcome, and then we're like, bye, and we shut the door, and then you have to leave. I once pulled 2 fathers in who were fist fighting out in the schoolyard into my principal. And she looked at me and said, what do you want me to do? They're 2 dads. Like, they're not kids at the school. And it was just easier to have them go away. You send your kids to camp, retreat with 2 phones. I'm a big fan of stay over camp. My kids both go to a camp called Minneoe. My wife worked at one called Muskoka Woods. There's a whole bunch of names. But this is now common. This is the phone for your lead youth pastor or whoever else, and then one that you can do proof of life every night before you go to bed. You go on a job interview with your child. 1 in 7 teenagers. A father in Chicago calls his daughter at UCLA, California, to wake her up and give her agenda for the day. Does not quite fully formed humans start to make a little more sense? So the next one is the only one I get hate mail for. You always make your kids lunch. So when should a kid make their own lunch? As soon as humanly possible. There's only 8 things they can bring for lunch anyways. Put them all on the counter, have them pull it into their bag and zip it up and pat yourself on the back. They're more likely to eat it if they pull it into the bag themselves. There's actually studies on that. Can you imagine there's studies on that? But there is. Now, it doesn't mean that if your kid had a bad night, they're sick, they had a sport event, they're studying for an exam, you can't make their lunch, but it just means you're letting them learn certain things. You call your kids' teachers to argue marks as opposed to equipping them how to speak to adults. And what do you do when the first day of September, they're not in class with their best friend and you call the principal to, they have to be in that class? What are you telling your kid? You're saying you can't survive without your best friend? Sure they can. And you know when this is figured out? By day 2, when they realize it's recess or something else. As a side note, maybe when is a kid old enough to carry their own backpack? You know how many dads I see coming after the buses drop kids off with Dora the Explorer and Spider-Man backpacks? Overparenting is fear-based parenting. It's the question of what if. There is this interesting rhythm in homes today where we speed up kids' early development. Let's pause there for a sec. The music kids listen to today is atrocious, right? The news that we have on, please don't have news on with little kids, and maybe even don't watch the news every day as adults. It's not, and I like news, but it's not here's what's good today. It's here's everything bad in the world today. Movies. Anybody a Marvel movie fan? A number of years ago, I went to see Marvel Avengers Endgame, probably one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. I went with my 15-year-old son. You know what really concerned me? The theater was filled with 4, 5, and 6, not grade, year-old kids. This is not a normal movie. This is a movie with 3,500 deaths, said one person. And death's a big deal with little kids. One of my pastors was watching this with his teenage son. In front of him was a 4-year-old kid who turned to his dad and said, "Dad, I'm really scared." And the dad told the kid to shut up in the middle of the movie. Can you just see the influence just float away? It was in kindergarten. I took my 2 kids. We went to like a mall. Remember, like mall food, and then we went to see a movie. And we went to see Up. Remember Up with the old guy and the balloons? Do you remember the opening credits? The mom dies. My daughter Zoe turns to me, tears pouring down her face, and says, "Did the mommy just die?" And I'm like, I thought it was a cartoon. Like it's one movie I didn't research, and the mom died. Death's a big deal. So be careful when they're younger, but then they get older, then we put the brakes on. My new phenomenon is young adults pastors who bring me in to talk about dating. And here's what they bring me out for dinner before, and they're like, "So just want to let you know, we have 50, 100, 200 young adults, no one's dating." 200 young adults was one pastor. No one's dating. Now, is that the pushback from purity culture? We know the difference between purity and purity culture, where we take it too far. One kid said to me, because I just said to them, "Why aren't you dating? There's 200 people in a room. Tell me why you're not dating." One person said, "My mom told me if I have coffee with someone, that will be probably someone I'll have to marry." Who says that to a child? The fear you put in their life of who they even have a coffee with, they're going to have to marry. How about licenses? In my day, Now, you're Alberta. You can get a license at 14 if I'm correct. Can you not? Is it anywhere or just on a farm? Anywhere? Wow, awesome. So it's 16 for me. And you know what I hear? So it was 90+% in my day. We're down to 60 to 80% of kids getting their licenses. And you know what I hear when I ask kids? They say, oh, we live in a big city. We drive a van. And I'm like, I can hear your mom or dad just saying that, because that's not what kids say. Our fear becomes our kids' fear. When my daughter was 14, we're driving past my church. She said, can I drive one day in the parking lot? I'm like, we'll do it right now. We went in. She didn't even hit the gas. 12 and a half kilometers. We went in a circle for 40 minutes. Every time we talked about driving, we talked about what a great privilege it is to drive. She said, but Dad, we drive a big Santa Fe. Big Santa Fe. You guys are in Alberta. You've seen the trucks. I have a 4Runner, which is the biggest thing I've ever driven in my life outside in the parking lot right now. And every time she said, it's big, I'm like, that's fine. We'll teach you. Day she turned 16, she got her license. And yeah, when she drives 2 hours to school once in a while, my heart's a little bit worried, and I pray for her, but it's good. But these are the things we then put the brakes on. This is interesting thoughts, all the ideas of parenting styles. So this is the biggest section by far, but just to summarize, authoritative parenting. Don't overparent. And I would suggest kids over grade 4, tell them, we don't want to overparent you. Can you tell me when you're overparenting me? Do life with, not for. And we didn't talk about this one, but coach. So I coached AA baseball, and so all winter I'd work with my 10 guys and my one girl from my last year. But on the first day, I don't go onto the field. They do. They go and play the game. And this is how you need to view kids. Your kids, what day of the week is today? Tuesday? Tuesday. Okay, so tomorrow your kids go back to school. Some of them will get in a bus, and some of them will be driven, and then they have school all day. And then if you have kids who are a bit older, they may go get a part-time job. They might be working at McDonald's or Starbucks or something. Can they deal with people and adults and all of these things? This is the idea of coaching your kids so that they can deal with these things when they're there. And book suggestions, again, these are all listed for you later. We've talked about Trophy and how to raise an adult. Hold on to your kids is phenomenal. Karen's a Christian, mainstream book though. Dr. Karen's Guide to the Teen Years. I read this when my kids were 9 and 8. Older book, unbelievable book. And if you can't read this, it says free-range kids, kind of like free-range chickens. There was a mom in Winnipeg a few years ago who called Child Protective Services because a grade 6 kid rode his bike home from school alone. And they actually filled a report. I rode my bike to school every day in grade 2. 2.5 kilometers. Hands on, hands near, hands off. My parents went with me for the first few weeks. My parents then rode as far behind me as humanly possible, but they were there. And then they said it was hands off. I thought they weren't there. They drove in a car. But they taught me how to do it. So many thoughts on the ideas of what is parenting. Second would be the greatest gift I think you can give your kid is time. Now, I almost could argue the greatest gift you can give your kid is failure. And if someone's like, no, it's Jesus, yes, right? Just a different conversation than what we're talking about right now. Now, have you ever heard the idea of losing your marbles? Different analogy, though. The day you have a child, you have 936 days, 936 marbles, until they graduate grade 12. Now, that's not a perfect analogy, unless your kid's born June 25th. And so I used to carry marbles with me. I had 2,000 marbles in 3 different big glass jars, and I got cut off on a highway, and it wasn't in my mind thinking, am I going to die? I was wondering, did I put lids on the marbles jars? And the answer was no. And 2,000 marbles went under my mat. I'm trying to hit the brakes, and marbles are under me, so I don't bring them anywhere. But the idea is not just the marbles, because you're losing them. The idea to me is the occasions. If it was a few years ago and, I got invited to come and speak here, but it was November 23rd or March 4th, I would say thank you so much, but I can't. Because I put a little barrier around both of my kids' birthdays. Because both my kids are now in university. Both their kids' birthdays fall while they're away at school. So in the last 2 years, this year for my son and 2 years for my daughter, haven't had birthdays. Now, this is the time that I see people's shoulders droop a little bit because there's a bit of grieving. I've seen people burst out crying because we begin to realize that parenting in the way that we know it ends. But that's why I want to call this a marbles analogy with a twist. The day your kids turn 18, the day they graduate, high school is the best one, dump out whatever marbles are left, and then I want you to start over. Remember, the marble is the analogy of time, right? You take a marble out every Sunday, that bit of time is gone. The chance to go watch your kid play volleyball, to sit on the couch and watch a movie and have a conversation and go to church or pray with your kids or whatever else. But the day they graduate high school, flip it. Start putting marbles in. Every time you encourage your kids. So the other 2 weekends ago and 3 weekends ago, we both drove. My kids chose universities 3 hours in this direction and 2 hours in this direction. So it takes an entire day. My wife and I just said, we're going to do that. So we drove 7 hours one day back and forth to go see my daughter to have lunch. And all we said is, that's a lot of marbles we did today because she was having a really hard go. And every time you call, FaceTime, Skype, every time, my daughter's boyfriend's actually from Calgary. And so every time we encourage them as a couple, every time, and then in time, your kids will get married. Then you have son or daughter-in-law. Then you have grandkids. And every time you babysit, take them out for dinner, take them on a vacation, whatever else. Mom yells out once, what do I do when my jar's filled again? And I'm like, oh, I love that. What a great idea. Dump it out and start all over again. Your kids are always your kids, but it's not the same as they are when they're younger. But I'll just let you know, as a parent with both kids away at university, my kids need me just as much as ever. Every single day we are on FaceTime. And the things are big thoughts, big questions, life questions, changing majors. Do I do my LSATs? Do I not do my LSATs? My son, I want to go work at camp this summer, but then I need to make money for school. My daughter, she's a SOF, if you don't know the term SOF, she's a residence advisor for second years. I called the ambulance 3 times last night for people passing out. I really feel shaky right now. Things are just different, right? It's a different kind of exhaustion. Morning time with time matters. I'm a morning person, and this is what I always did. Make sure my kids are ready for the day, and encouragement, quick prayer, whatever it might be. Drive time matters. If you have kids from grade 4 through high school before they're driving, if they ever say, will you drive me and my 5 friends to wherever, your answer is, yeah. Have you ever been in a car with 6 boys or girls? It's like you don't even exist. It's like you have plexiglass around you, and they just start talking. It's like you're not even there. And mealtime matters. We're going to come back to that. And bedtime matters for all stages except for teenagers. Can we just say if you're tucking in a 17-year-old, you're overparenting? Can we just acknowledge that and move forward? 17-year-olds, it's usually, did they go to bed? Or they say night and off they go. If you want one of the simplest, most easy things to deal with to make good things happen, meals. Columbia University, 4 massive studies. If you eat 3 dinners a week together, every single bad statistic goes down dramatically. Now, there's nothing magical about chicken. It's not the food. It's the moment. It's the meal. It is the preparation, the cooking, the serving. We all start eating when everyone's sitting. It's not shoving it into your mouth. It's asking questions. We always do rosebud thorn in our house. Tell me something that happened good today. Bud, something you're looking forward to. Thorn, what's something really hard that happened? And we're involved as adults. But teens benefit from this so much. Main thoughts, marbles. Now, if you know the group, The Parent Queue, it's a really great Fuller University podcast in the United States. They actually, on the app, have a free marbles analogy for you. It's built right into the app. Meals matter. Scheduling, we didn't address, but scheduling matters less when your kids are little because they're with you all the time, and you know that. Middle school, they're with you less, but you still got to schedule gymnastics and drives. But it's in high school that the world changes. Both my kids became lifeguards. As a side note, lifeguarding is a phenomenal job for kids. But suddenly, both my kids got lifeguarding jobs very quickly. One worked Monday, Thursday. One worked Tuesday, Friday. 4 days of the week were now shot for family dinners. And so now it became every Sunday night, my iPhone would ding, and it would say, when is your family night? And we would sit down with the kids. Now, I travel for a living. My wife's a nurse who sometimes has a bit later shifts. Are my kids going out? But we would just say, what night of the week are we playing Settlers of Catan, going for ribs, watching a movie, whatever? And then the rocks analogy. Leave this. I'm going to talk about this at the very end. Book suggestions. My favorite name of a book tonight, The Grown-Up's Guide to Teenage Humans. Great book by Josh Shipp. The Power of Moments by Dan and Chip Heath. This is the idea of celebrate moments. I don't know why we started it. I think because there was an ice cream truck outside our school on the last day of school, but we began to go for ice cream the last day of every school year. But it's not just celebrating grade 8, graduations. We at home do something called the Family Gold Plate. We actually, to celebrate, have a big, it's a cheap gold plate, but Whether you're having your eggs or your spaghetti or whatever else for dinner on it, we're celebrating you. We all go around the table and talk about what we love about you. And fair play might be a weird one here, but you'll understand it when I finish. So fair play is talking about the emotional labor of women. And if you don't understand this conversation, just realize that the emotional labor of women during COVID has skyrocketed. Now, most men, when we talk about this, begin a conversation of, well, I do certain things. I do the snow, I fix things, and I'm like, emotional labor is different. But it's important to acknowledge. So let me give you an example of my brilliant knowledge of this in my own home. Said really sarcastically. My wife, as I come down the stairs one day, says, on the kitchen table is your father's birthday card. Sign it, the gift's beside it. We're going to see your dad and your mom today for lunch. It's my dad's birthday. I have no idea. I didn't remember and go buy a card. I did not remember and go buy a gift. I did not call and say, can we come over for lunch today? My wife did. That's emotional labor. It takes space in the brain, and there's a million of those things. Those are the kinds of things. So there's actually, if you read this book, you can actually get a deck of cards off Amazon, and there's hundreds of these things. And my wife and I divided a whole bunch up. Because in my mind, it was like, I love the snowblower, I will do that. I do the outside yard work, I'll fix everything that's broken, but there's a lot more than that. But why do we do this? It's so we teach our kids how to do their things. So in our house, we have a second bathroom upstairs, and so we said to the kids, here is your card. And we actually taught them properly how to clean a bathroom, and we actually began with teenagers, hands on, hands near, hands off, but it's actually theirs. Time matters. Spending time matters. And can I encourage you, and I said this during the media talk for kids today, full attention when your kids come and talk to you. Too often today, we as adults, I polled hundreds of kids recently. You know what they said? I want to see my parents, not with the blue dim of the, like they all use different language, but with the phone in their face. If you're on your phone and your kid comes in, my new rule is phone goes down. I turn to you. I'm not like on my laptop, but looking at you, like full attention. Again, you only have so much time for that when your kids are younger, but full attention matters. Communication. So now we're spending time with our kids. Now the question is, how do we communicate with them? And what do we communicate? Do our kids know we love them forever and always? And yes, that's a Robert Munch book and quote, but do they know we love them no matter what happens? Do they only think we love them when they follow rules or they get good grades in school? So Gary Chapman talks about three things if your relationship's broken. Number one, saying, I'm sorry. It's a big deal for us as adults to say I'm sorry. And I struggle, my biggest thing is sleep. I haven't slept through the night now in 10 years, and so I wake up exhausted. And so there are some days I don't sleep well, and I come down, and I'm maybe abrasive just by my words, or I'm a bit angry. And I got to say go up to my kids' rooms and say, Zoe or Ben, I'm really sorry. I'm having a bad morning. I took it out on you. I'm really sorry. My kids will always say, it's okay, Dad. It's not okay. It might be okay now. We might have a good enough relationship that that's enough, but it's not okay that I take it out on you guys. Maybe then you have to go and spend more time or better communication. We do not have the same relationship with all of our kids. My son and I love sports. We talk about, even when I'm traveling, like last week I'm away and he's talking about every shot Tiger Woods does at the Masters. Like, we love sports. I've coached every team he's ever been on. We've had more wings and been out playing together. My daughter is a gymnast and a dancer. I always threaten to coach her dancing, which is a joke you can say like once. But her and I have to work at our relationship. That does not mean we don't have an awesome relationship. It's just that it doesn't come naturally because we don't share the same things, but we do. There's things we found we love. We both love iced coffee. So if we get a chance to have an iced coffee, we're getting iced coffee. We make it at home. When she's away at school, every time we get an iced coffee at Starbucks, we take a picture and send it back and forth. We both love chicken shawarma. And so if we're ever alone together, we get dinner. We both watch a TV show on Netflix that only her and I watch, not my wife or my son. We only watch it when we're together. And if that isn't working, maybe you need some counseling. Counseling is from a registered, trained person. And I would say, it's good. Please normalize counseling in your homes. Normalize it. It's not, someone once said it's only for the broken. And I'm like, well, I'm pretty broken, but it's also to make your marriage better. It's also to be a better parent. It's to gain some insight in your life or your mental health or whatever. My kids have always just known I go for counseling. My wife and I have gone, and we've just said, anytime you want to go, you can. And we were honest, you do not need to go and then do counseling every, once a week for the next 6 months. You can go for a couple sessions. They took us up in high school, and we found out during university they both took a few sessions. And I'm proud of them for that. But are we listening to our kids? I spoke last week at a Christian school. I spoke on media, and then we did a Q&A, kind of like we did a bit today. But every question last week was on mental health, every single one. And what most kids said afterwards was, I've told my parents I'm struggling, and they say, no, you're not. You're fine. I'll pray for you. And then they never address it again. I'm speaking at a church. My favorite thing is a Sunday morning mental health talk. I call it Care Sunday. And I finished speaking, and I'm down at the front chatting, and down comes one of the worship leaders, a young girl, teenager. She's 15, 16, and I can see she's already shaking as she walks up to me. If you've had panic attacks, you can see the signs. Now I'm a little shaky, because if you see someone getting a panic attack and you have panic attacks, and she begins to share her story. She said, Brett, I've told my dad again and again and again and again, I'm struggling, and every time he says nothing. He never addresses it again. And at that moment, the lead pastor walked over just to interrupt to say, we're going for lunch. I usually go for lunch with the lead pastor or the youth afterwards. And as he interrupts, he says, Brett, I'm sorry, I see you met my daughter. And then he noticed she's crying. And I've known him for a long time. And I said, you got a minute? And we had a chance to bridge this kind of gap. But what is it when someone says they're not okay, that our response is, sure you are? Anybody remember the band REM from the mid-1990s? They have a song called Shiny Happy People. Is that us in the church? That we all want to be like, we're the perfect Christian family. Look at us. No, we don't struggle. We live in the now and the not yet. We may love Jesus, but we have things that happen. And if your kid says, I'm struggling with self-harm, I'm struggling with porn, I'm struggling with alcohol, my anxiety is killing me, I don't know why I feel blah every day, your answer is, I am so sorry. I love you so much, and we'll get through this together. And if you don't know what to say, which is fine, go talk to someone. You have, if you're a parent tonight, you have teachers here. There's. I called you a chaplain again. Is that the right term? Pastor. I'll get it right one of these times. But go talk to David. Go talk to other people. Talk to your youth pastors at your churches, other people. But get some people around you and figure out what to do. And while you're doing that, now, one last quote, and I know I'm taking it out of context. But Martin Luther King Jr. once said, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. Think of that in this context. What a betrayal it is for parents when a kid says, I'm not okay, to not address that. Have you ever heard the quote, it's okay to not be okay? Now, the rest of that line says, but it's not okay to stay that way. I disagree with that because I don't know what you're struggling with. It's not just easy to not have that struggle anymore. And remember, you're being watched. I had an incredibly unorthodox Sunday morning service a few years ago. I was invited in to speak on pornography for their Sunday morning sermon. Pastor polled his church and said, what do you need help with? Mental health was number 1. Sex and porn was number 2. And so I finished my talk. I'm on the way home. I'm having Subway. My phone dings, an email. Young kid says, hey, Brett, young kid, he's 18. He says, hey, if I ever struggle with porn, can I come talk to you? I'm like, yeah. Why wouldn't you talk to your dad? I know your dad. He's the associate pastor. He said, Brett, my dad got in the car. He says, I don't know if you know, I have 2 other teenage brothers and sisters. So he said, my dad got in the car. The first thing out of his mouth was this: what kind of stupid person gets addicted to porn? And the son said to me, Brett, in that moment, my dad said that he's not a safe person to talk to about anything ever again. And I felt like crying. In that one moment, the pastor lost every bit of influence he had with his son and probably his other kids. As a side note, where's the grace and the mercy for someone who's struggling with addictions in the church? If someone in this school, someone at your church, someone in a local high school, grade 9 girl gets pregnant, and your response is, if you play with fire, you're going to get burnt. What does that say to your kids if they ever get in trouble? In middle school, I sat down with both of my kids, and I said, listen, you know how I feel about drinking and alcohol. We walked through it. Remember it's not just telling the rules of why not, it's explaining why we shouldn't do these things. But I just said, listen, if you ever mess up, you can call me. If you're ever at a party and you make a bad decision, you can call me any place, anytime, and I'll drive you home. I've had two friends who'd never made this deal with their kids, and these two kids, different kids, walked home at night drunk, and both were hit by cars. They were like nighttime, dark clothing, and got hit by cars and died. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying make a deal with your kids. Now, as my kids got older, the problem is that I go to bed early. And so how do I drive my kids home when they're leaving? If you don't have teens yet, like they go out when you're going to bed. And so I put the Uber app with my credit card on their phones. And they rarely took me up on it, but when they did, and I get a $30 Uber the next morning, it's okay. It's okay. And in grade 9, I said to my daughter, I said, honey, I have one of the weirdest things you're going to probably ever hear out of my mouth, but I just want to say this. If you ever get pregnant, she's like, Dad, I'm like, listen to me. If you ever do, you can come talk to me. And I just said, there's nothing you could ever do that would change how much I love you. And my daughter burst into tears. Do our kids know? Like, do they know that there's nothing in the world that would ever change how much your kids love you? I always say to my kids, we're for you, we're not against you. There were no battles in my house. It was always like, my wife and I vowed, if we can say yes, we will say yes. So let's walk through it. Have you read 5 Love Languages? Anybody? Like, phenomenal book. This is a teen version. There's a children's version. It was a couple years ago for Christmas, my wife and I went and bought my son. We were out somewhere, and you all know the musician Drake. He has a clothing brand called OVO, like stupid expensive shirts, but my son wanted one. And so we went to a pop-up shop. You know what a pop-up shop is? Like a shop that pops up and it's gone. It's not always there. So we went there and we bought it was like $80 for a t-shirt. It was his entire Christmas gift. Anyways, but we bought him this. And on Christmas morning, he opened it up and he looked up and his lip quivered. And he said, it wasn't about the shirt. He said, you remembered? It's like, yeah. Like, my son, gifts matter. And it's not just the gift, it's that gift, right? It's the right gift that lets you know that you are known. Like, we know you. We understand you. Main thoughts with communication, listen. John Maxwell says, listen 80% of the time, talk the rest. Drive your kids anywhere you can, because one day they don't need you to drive them anymore. Love languages and family meeting. When I did the Arrow Leadership Program, it was a number of years ago, and the guy who was running it was Carson Pugh at the time, and he challenged us to have annual general family meetings. And I remember thinking, Carson, I love you, but this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. And I came home and I told my wife, and she said, let's do it. And so we did. My kids were 9 and 8, 8 and 7. And we put an agenda on the fridge, and we said, we're having a family meeting, and we got to the day of the meeting, and there's nothing on the agenda, and we're like, did we explain what an agenda was, or did we just say there's something on the fridge? And so we had a family meeting. We're going to be a Christian family. What does that mean? Do you need new skis? We like to ski. Now, I mean, my ski hills compared to your ski hills are a joke. I'll just acknowledge that. But we like to go to hills and ski. But we went through everything. And even Halloween, and I'm not going to debate Halloween. I love to go meet my neighbors. But so we would say, if you want to be a dog, don't tell us on October 30th. And then we said, anywhere in the world you want to go for dinner, we'll go. 8 and a 7-year-old, anybody want to guess where we went? Anybody? McDonald's. We're having a really bad dinner, and I said to my wife, we're done. And she said, you know what, let's do it one more time. So we did a really good explanation of an agenda, put an agenda on the fridge. We got to the day of the meeting. It is filled top to bottom. Number 1, they want a baby brother or sister. Number 2, they want a dog. Now, at this point, my wife is a part-time nurse. I've left teaching. I'm now in quote-unquote ministry. I'm not making the same salary. We did every year, we decided we want to go on a family vacation. So it meant even part of our Christmas gifts and birthday gifts were sometimes that. We pulled the kids out of school at certain points. But we vowed that. But we said, listen, a dog costs a lot of money. And my son said, I'll give up the vacation for a dog. I really want a dog. He's 8. These were big conversations. A few years later, we have an English bulldog named Bailey, best part of our life right now. And that year we said, anywhere you want to go, we'll go for dinner. And my daughter said, my favorite restaurant's the Keg. And we're like, you've never been to the Keg. You're 9. Anybody remember the TV show iCarly? Anyone remember that from a long time ago? After the TV show, who bought advertising space? The Keg. Brilliant, brilliant advertising. It's been the most precious moments of my family time since my kids were little. And we still do it. And at the end is other business. And anything that anyone wants to talk about, there's no unwritten rules. Everything's out in the open for the year. Book suggestions, you see they're starting to repeat. He's Not Lazy by Adam Prince is phenomenal for parents of boys. If you want ones for girls, I'll give you two, and these are on my list online, but Queen Bees and Wannabes is an older book by Rosalind Wiseman, and a newer one is called Untamed. As a side note, a number of these books are not from faith-based people. I assume you can read a book, chew the meat and spit out the bones, like take in the good things, add a Christian kind of influence on top of it, and these are the 5 love languages here as well. Last section, discipline. Ron Morrish is a traveling speaker who speaks to educators who once said, discipline is about teaching children to behave properly, not punishing them for behaving badly. I remember reading that, like, that's all of it put into one line. It's teaching our kids how to behave, how to live, how to work, how to interact. Zig Ziglar talks about connection before correction. You've heard that one a million times, but I kind of agree with it. Now, this is a huge quote. You don't need to read all of it, but the book is actually by Ross Greene called The Explosive Child. And what I love is the first line. Let's get back to kids do well if they can. And if a kid's not doing well, it means that they've learned maladaptive, poor ways to adapt, and we need to teach them better ways to deal with whatever situation. And the one on the right just says an emphasis on values instead of rules raises kids to do the right thing when no one's looking. So let's just do some basic things for discipline. Number 1, you need a relationship. This is a busy slide. This is from the Orange curriculum. Some of your churches might use it. This is just showing you how the amount of hours with your kids is less as they're older. This says positional influence. This says relational influence. So when you have a baby, you have 100% positional influence. I don't think there's any babies here tonight, but usually there's someone in the back doing that rock as you have, the strap over and you rock your baby. But if you're here and you're like, this Brett Ullman guy, I don't like him. I'm leaving. You just pick up your baby and off you go. If you're here with an 18-year-old tonight and you're like, I'm leaving, your kid might say, I'm going to get a ride home with so-and-so. I want to hear the rest of this. Like, your positional influence wanes. Your relational influence starts at nothing. But your relational influence is everything. It is 1,000 conversations. It is every time you're having dinner and loving on a kid and hugging them when they're crying and encouraging them. It's all of that stuff. And that gives you this freedom here where you actually have times when you can actually address things and deal with things with your kids. This idea to me is everything. Attachment parenting, relationships with our kids. Number 2, clear, agreed on expectations and consequences. My friend Karen talks about this idea of 3 types of fences. Stone wall boundaries, like authoritarian. I'm the parent, these are the rules, follow them or else. Middle one is wild field boundaries. I'm at a talk and a father comes up and he says, hey Brett, so I grounded my kid because he was late for curfew. If you have a grade 7 above kid, curfews are great conversation. So I said, oh, when's his curfew? He said, oh, he doesn't have one. I said, sorry, he was grounded because he's late for curfew. Great, when's his curfew? He doesn't have one. I didn't know what to, I said, I don't understand. He says, well, he should have known when he should have been home. Wild field. What we should be is picket fence boundaries. Rules are clear, flexible, and negotiated. Summer of grade 8, my son is asking, can he stay out late? It's one of those perfect August nights. Can you just wait for those again? He says, can I come home at 11 tonight? A bunch of us are going to go, we live right on Lake Ontario. I'm going to go for a walk and hang out for a bit. I'm like, okay, 11. 10 after 11 or so, he comes in. And what is it with us as adults? I'm furious. It's 10 minutes. Moment he comes in, I'm like this, and he says, I know I'm late, let me tell you why. And I'm like, just let me yell at you just a little bit. And he says, so it was 10 to 11, we dispersed. He said dispersed. And he says, we're all walking home, and all the friends started kind of falling off down their streets. It was suddenly him and a girl left. They had to walk through this really dark section to get to our house. And she said, do you mind walking me home first? And my son said, Dad, I knew you'd rather me walk her home and be late than tell her she has to go home alone to be home at 11. I took a big breath because I almost tore into this kid. Why? Because he did the right thing? Some parents fail to realize that it's the job of every child to tear down their parents' fences and build their own. Do you want your kids to love Jesus because you love Jesus or because they love Jesus? Because they're very different. Do you want your kids to do well in school because it gives them opportunities or because they want to do well for you? Do you want your kids to come home in good times to get good night's sleeps because there's a curfew or because that they want to get good night's sleeps because it's good for them to be rested? My wife and I took a very different thing. As we were walking through this conversation, this hands near kind of hands on, hands near, hands off. We're like, well, my daughter was leaving for university in 2 years. And we're like, how do we teach her about curfews? And we're like, well, she has none in 2 years. So let's release them now. So we can be here. We can have conversations. And so in grade 10, we stopped having curfews. Now, we didn't say, no more curfews. It was just like, I'm going out. What time do I need to be home? It'd be like, when do you want to be home tonight? And whatever she said goes. Now, it might sound weird, but the reality is we wanted her to be able to be out whenever, like she was going to do this at university anyways. We wanted her to have practice at this with us around. And so it was 10, 11, 12, and then one day it was 2:30, and I remember kind of choked, and I said, 2:30? And then she said, my friend's coming back. A friend was in Jamaica, I think, on a vacation, flying home. They wanted to go hang out. And I said, yeah. And the next morning she got up and she said, wow, that was way too late to be out. I'm like, that worked out way too perfect. Someone once said, nothing good happens after 10. They actually yelled it out of my talk. Nothing good happens after 10. And in my head, I'm kind of like, wow, we sound old. Do we remember what it's like to be 15, 17? This idea that people are only drinking and having sex after 10. Like, you know when people have sex, right? 4 to 6 o'clock is a lot higher than after 10 o'clock. Like, it's funny how we think it's that. Like, if you have good kids from, like, 7 till 10, you have good kids from 10 till midnight. If they're just sitting at a party doing nothing and there's lots of drinking, yes, there's some issues that could arise. But if your kids are hanging out with good kids and just playing Settlers of Catan till 2 in the morning, didn't you do that? Don't some of us still do that? I like this. This is about teaching our kids how to use technology, teaching them how to do things. And then we had punishment versus training. Ron Morris says, you have to decide what you're all about. Are you here to give children the punishment and consequences they deserve for failure, or the training and support they need for success? All good discipline has a purpose to it. All good discipline has a purpose to it. If there's no purpose, then we shouldn't be doing it. Now, I would encourage you to try the best you can to not take away your kids' phones. If I took away your phone for the next few days, how would you feel? Just being honest, right? Most of us, like, have you ever left your phone and gone shopping and you feel shaky, like you keep grabbing your pocket, you're getting phantom rings, it's not there? But the one thing that we don't deal with that our kids do is kind of this social game that kids are all involved in, and taking away their phone actually causes issues with them not being part of their friends and other networks and things. Now, if the phone is the issue, sure. But if it's not, try more natural consequences. My son once, grade 10, heading off to school, it's -8, -10, and he's heading out the door. I'm like, hey, Ben, you didn't wear your... I'm like, oh, you're in grade 10. Have a good day. He leaves. He comes back at the end of the day. The first thing out of his mouth is, why don't you tell me to wear a coat today? I'm like, because you're in grade 10. He goes, okay. And he didn't wear a coat again, because it's his issue. If he doesn't want to wear a coat, he can not wear a coat. Now, I'm going to put up 3 slides. And can I just ask one thing? If you and I differ on this, it's okay. And please don't let our difference in the next conversation ruin the entire night, because we're going to talk about spanking. Now, a lot of you have kids who are old enough and it's irrelevant. If you're spanking a 17-year-old, right, probably a conversation we need to have. But let me just say this about spanking. And as a side note, you and me can have differing opinions and still be brothers and sisters in Christ. It's a thing we're losing in the church world today. So I think that there are good parents who don't spank. I don't believe in spanking. And there are good parents who spank. My wife spanked my daughter a number of times. Very quickly, spanking leads to abuse. Talk to any counselor, any psychologist. There are incredible amounts of abuse that happened, especially with my generation, from parents. I was spanked. A lot of you were spanked. Just because you were spanked, by the way, you're not forever damaged. And very quickly, not spanking could also be not discipline. And spoiled kids, right? It doesn't always lead to that. Now, as faith-based people, we would turn to Proverbs 13:24. First, we say, does the Bible say to do it? Now, here's the most interesting thing about Proverbs 13:24. Very fortunate. I've been in almost every Bible college in the country, or I've had conversations with professors, and I ask the same question to any professor. Do you think this is about spanking? Anybody want to guess how many of the hundreds of professors I've talked to have said it's about spanking? None. Not one in any denomination. They all say the same thing. Proverbs 13:24. He who spares the rod hates his son. Many of them say there's a delineation between the rod and a rod, not the baseball player. A rod, a physical rod. The rod is a construct, like the rod of discipline, which is what they're saying this is about. A rod is when an Egyptian beats an Israelite to death with a rod. It's a bad thing always. And so it's like, and then it's also a proverb. I mean, there's many proverbs we don't follow. Gentlemen, if you have a quarrelsome wife, do you live on the edge of your roof? Like, if you're a glutton, put a knife to your throat. Again, it's wisdom. So if you don't discipline your kid, it's bad. So if it's not biblical, then the question is does it work? Largest study ever done, studied 160,000 children. And they found the kids who were spanked defy their parents more increased antisocial behavior, aggression, mental health problems, and cognitive difficulties. And so if it's not biblical and it doesn't work, then we should find different things. Now, here's the quote that I think is the most interesting. Ron says, research says that whether a child gets a punitive spanking or not is hardly ever determined by the child's behavior. It's almost always determined by how the adult's day went. And that's why children don't get spankings at 8 in the morning. They get them at 8 at night. When an adult who is tired, frustrated, and exasperated starts to hit a kid, it shouldn't be about us. So for 3 slides, I just leave this with you. I have a 25-minute video on this on YouTube. And again, we might have differing opinions, and if you spank and I don't, it's okay. I just want you to think about spanking and question why we do it and when we do it. But discipline's an important conversation. It should be about teaching, though. If you are going to spank, if you are frustrated with the kid, if they are getting a timeout or grounded, why? What is it that happened? How could you teach them to not have that happen again? Influence, work as hard as you can. The more your attachment with your kid, the less discipline you will have. Every study is the same with that. Isn't that interesting? The better the relationship, the less discipline. Picket fence boundaries. Rules are clear, flexible, and negotiated, and choose teaching versus punishment. Now, tons of books. This one doesn't look good. It's fantastic. Explosive Child is probably one of the best books I've read on parenting. This is Allison Schaefer, Parent on Purpose, Grace-Based Discipline, and this is so small. This is Dr. John Townsend and Henry Cloud. If you know those authors, some of my favorite authors who write in Christianity. So we looked at parenting, communication, time, and discipline. This is just some of those things I think we add together with everything else we've learned that gives us a foundation. And then we need to address everything. Mental health, sexuality, pornography, dating, media, drugs, alcohol, and the list goes on. So I want to give you 2 on-ramps tonight, media and mental health. Media, first, don't expect your kids to do anything that you're not doing. Father says to me a summer ago, during COVID, just before COVID, says to me, hey, so I grounded my kid because he played 4 hours of Fortnite last night. Again, grounding, discipline question, interesting, because he played 4 hours of Fortnite. Is that a groundable offense? And so I just said to him, hey, what did you do last night? And he said, I watched the Toronto Blue Jays game. And I'm like, the Toronto Yankees game yesterday? He goes, yeah. And I said, the one that went to 17 innings? And at that moment, he knew he was done. It was a 4.5-hour game. Or long, I think it might have been 5 hours. And so son spent 4 hours, even with a headset, with hand-eye coordination, doing something. The father spent the entire day watching a single Jays game. But the son got grounded. The father didn't get grounded. If you come home from work and crash on the couch and watch 4 hours of TV every day, how do you expect your kids to do anything different? If you're on your phone every waking moment of every day, how do you expect your kids to do different? And please don't buy into the fear stuff that's in our Christian culture. We get a lot of these, like, 5 apps you got to delete right away. It's not about the app. I always found the most interesting conversation was a woman who said, she said, Brett, I guess your kids don't have Snapchat. What do you mean my kids? Do you think I'm so enlightened as a speaker that I suddenly wouldn't give my kids Snapchat? I'm like, both my kids have Snapchat. It's the #1 app in the world for kids to have, like, my kids have, like, their camp friends, their church friends, their school friends, like their little chat groups. And she said, but can't you send naked photos on that? And I said, I can send you naked photos with email and the Photos app. And she said, why are you sending me naked photos? And I'm like, you're missing what I'm not sending you naked photos. But it's not about the app. It's about teaching our kids digital citizenship. What we do online, like how we act offline and how we act online. Like, what do we do? How do we take our faith into that environment? I put this up for the kids today. This is just what I'm calling my brain dump for my new talk. This is what we're seeing roughly with kids today. This is grade 12. 50% of grade 12 say they're addicted to tech. By their own admission, them. Addiction to alcohol and drugs is skyrocketing. And please, again, don't think we're in the church, we don't have this. The number of young mothers who write me and saying, I'm barely hanging on with little sleep and I'm drinking a glass of wine or whatever at night now just to survive, it's staggering. Bullying is growing by leaps and bounds. The lack of social skills. Our young boys today, I told this story to the kids, suddenly every guy in the room's quiet. The average college-age guy today cannot look a girl in the eye and have a conversation. Multiple studies are saying this. The reason is guys play video games until the last moment humanly possible. Women play video games, but finish and have face-to-face contact, go for coffees, face-to-face stuff. Guys are missing out on learning those cues of how conversation goes. Sexting, 70% of high school students have admitted this. And the 2 studies I read say there's no difference between Christian kids and non-Christian kids. Are we teaching our kids a biblical worldview of healthy sexuality? I call it a Christian sexual ethic. If you're a philosophy major, you will argue that. Anyone else won't, because there's something about ethics or changing. I don't understand. I'm not a philosophy major. But do we teach our kids how to deal with sex and dating and pornography? I have videos, by the way, on YouTube, professionally designed, on sex, on dating, and on pornography. We have unhealthy lifestyles and loneliness. 47% of middle schoolers now say they're lonely after COVID. And adults, loneliness has been my biggest journey for the last 25 years of my life. Most of my friends now are in high-level leadership. They're lead pastors all around the world. They lead United Nations food distribution in Malawi. Yeah, we don't hang out much with him and I. And then we're parents, and then we don't have a lot of time. COVID was a perfect example of how men and women do things differently. My wife had walks and every few times a week there'd be 15 women on a screen having conversation, and I just did what most guys did. We just hunkered down alone. The goal should be this, and this is the difference with this talk. It's not telling our kids, don't play video games. It's saying to our kids, do you want to be this when you graduate grade 12? And working with them to not have that happen. It's not saying, get off Snapchat. It's walking with them or TikTok, trying to explain and understand what long-term social media use might do, especially to our young girls. Our kids are losing purpose. This is especially for young men. Compassion and empathy is what's lost with video games. Our kids don't have resilience because of overparenting. Think of that cheap plastic ball. You push in, it pops back out. That should be your kids. In grade 9, when one of my daughter's friends tries to take her life in the first few weeks of grade 9, it rocks her world. But with resilience, you're able to kind of pop back up when grandma dies or a parent gets cancer or a friend dies. My daughter's kindergarten teacher died while she was in kindergarten. Things happen in life. This is where it's really bad, but we got to have resilience. Discipline, work ethic, our kids are just losing. You know that kids don't work anymore. In our day, everyone worked. McDonald's, somewhere else. And yes, they're not great jobs, but there's something you learn about a work ethic, being out and earning your own money. We need rich relationships. I challenge you to find at least 5 adults who are speaking into your kids' lives outside of you. Outside of you. When you have, I love having friends over, and when I have friends over, it's not us adults, kids go downstairs. They do go downstairs, but first, come and hang out. I want to talk to all the kids. How is school? How's college? How's the police academy? I want to be they know what I speak on. How's your mental health? Pastors, youth pastors, leaders, counselors, teachers, aunts, uncles, cousins, coaches. Who's building into your kids? And we want kids and adults with healthy bodies, healthy minds, and healthy souls. I do have 9 videos on how to have a better relationship with your phone. You know how many times we touch our phones as adults? 2,500 times a day. You know how many times we open it? 150 times a day. Here's what rocked me in that study, ... while on vacation. The one that's interesting for kids is school. If they do an assignment where they have their phone put on their computer and there's notifications popping up, a 45-minute assignment will take you roughly 3 to 4 hours to do. Say that to kids and suddenly it's this is what, my daughter now takes her phone and throws it onto another couch when she's doing homework. When I went to visit her at school, she's doing homework on her laptop. Everything's turned off, and her phone is way over there. And I challenge kids today, the best idea I've heard is delete all social media on Sunday night and reinstall it Friday, dinner. Work week is a work week. School, work, and then the weekend, you want to spend some time online? That's okay. And the biggest question parents always ask is how much tech time? First off, grace and mercy during COVID seasons, and hopefully we're kind of coming out of that. But in my house, we never used an amount of time because we didn't really know what to do with that. But here's what we used. We used the rocks analogy. Anyone ever heard the rocks analogy before? Think of like a big vase, whatever you want to say. In it, you're putting big rocks, medium rocks, and sand. If the sand goes in first, the big rocks won't all fit. Big rocks for my kids, and Faith was just an assumed one. I don't have it on here, but if they're doing well in school, if they're getting daily exercise, if they're reading. In high school, John Maxwell, and if you know John Maxwell, the leadership kind of guru, his dad paid him to read certain books. So my wife and I paid our kids to read certain books. 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. I paid my kids $20 to read it. There were certain books on faith, on dating that I just wanted them to read. If they were having family meals and involved, if they were having face-to-face contact with friends, part-time jobs, sports activities, if they're doing their chores, if it ends up being a Saturday night, you want to play 4 hours of Fortnite, I don't care. Because guess what I'm doing on a Sunday afternoon? I'm watching the Buffalo Bills football game. And I'm going to start watching the Raptors playoffs right now. Like, it's okay to do those things, but do what matters first. It's important to know, as a side note, what's happening in culture because it changes so rapidly. Parent Q is the app I told you about with the marbles analogy. This also is a podcast and blog. Growing Leaders is Tim Elmore. He speaks a lot about millennials. The truth is that stuff kind of could be for anyone these days, but really great. CPYU, if any of you were youth pastors back in the day, you might remember this. It's got Walt Mueller in the United States, Center for Parent and Youth Understanding. Sign up for all of these. They have like weekly email blasts, but do the CPYU. Here's, the other week, it was the article I read that says TikTok is now beating Google half the time now as the biggest website in the world. TikTok is crushing YouTube and beating Google. That's how big it is. It will tell you, one thing I like is, what was the latest controversy with music? Lil Nas X had a song. Anyone know Lil Nas X? He had a song where he descended into hell and had sex with Satan, I think it was. Like, horrible imagery. He is a scorned kid from being young, and he knows how to play culture because suddenly every Christian news thing in North America was tweeting, don't listen to this. What does everyone then do? They go and listen to it. But what CPYU does is these 3D media music reviews, how to have a conversation on this with your kid. And they lay out what's interesting, what's the analogy, why is he saying, just really great stuff. Plugged In is great for younger kids. Sometimes I switch to Common Sense Media by middle school. Common Sense is phenomenal. I really like it. And Axis is a fairly new player, but they have a teen culture translator, translating teen speak to adult speak. So I'm doing my research for my chapter on drugs and alcohol, and I said to my kids over dinner, so no one smokes anymore, right? And both of my kids went, almost everyone smokes. And I'm like, no one. And my daughter interrupts and says, what do you think smoking is? I kind of was taken aback, and I'm like, cigarettes. And she's like, oh, no, we're talking about weed. And my son's like, oh, yeah, we're talking about weed. And then she's like, yeah, no one smokes cigarettes anymore. And I'm like, I live in this sphere. This is my wheelhouse, and the wheelhouse has changed, and I didn't even know. And I'm like, okay, and that word, but this was all from the teen culture translator. I love media, and also I would encourage you, if your kids play video games, go play with them. They play Fortnite, great. Go play a thing of Fortnite with them. Just have some fun. When they say, I love this game, why do you love this game? Anything you do to gain connection with them. And mental health, I have an entire talk online, but I'll just give you a very quick synopsis of what I believe. I believe in the body, mind, and soul analogy. This is every church I've ever attended my entire life, meeting the physical, spiritual, and emotional needs of our community. A, we need to listen to our kids, but B, you don't know what's going on with them or you until you get assessed. Your issue might be physical. Go see a doctor. Go eat better. Nutrition is medicine. Exercise is medicine. Sleep is medicine. And yes, medicine is also medicine. And if your kids or you need to be on medicine, go to inagene.com. You can actually buy a package where they'll do a DNA test on you or your kids and tell you what medicines you should or shouldn't take. This is science, which is really great. Sleep clinics if you need it. When I say and or, what I mean, like some churches are or. One youth pastor, a friend of mine in Alberta, I'm not going to say name or denomination, had a breakdown near mine. He's been home for 5 months. His church said, your issue is spiritual. You will not go to a doctor. You will not go to a sleep clinic. This is lead pastor to his youth pastor. I call that religious abuse. I'll just say that outright. He calls me 5 months in and he says, I'm now suicidal and I don't know what to do. And I said, why won't you go to a sleep clinic? Like it's your number one issue. And he's like, I don't know. So I'm like, go to a sleep clinic. So we booked one. And I told him, go to the doctor in the morning and say, can you fix me? My doctor said, no. He said, you have fragmented sleep. There's nothing I can do. There's an issue. We don't know what it is. He went to his doctor, said, can you fix me? The doctor said, yeah. He said, you have the worst sleep apnea I've ever seen in my whole career. He put him on I call them a Darth Vader machine, BiPAP, CPAP machine. He's better in 1 day. He walked into church the next day. Have you ever not slept and slept? I'm glad the lead pastor kicked him out and sent him home for a bit longer, but if you don't know what's wrong, how do you assess? That church said he's a spiritual battle, but he needed the sleep apnea machine. Go see a therapist. Go learn. It was Pope Francis who once said, recovery is making a life despite limitations. If I had to stand tonight, I couldn't do it, but I can sit. Is my body anxious? Yeah, but I can sit. I'm learning how to deal with things. So it might be physical, it might be emotional. Nuance also matters. I don't say it might be spiritual because it's unbelievably uncommon that the answer to our mental illness is our faith, but it's the bedrock, it's the foundation which we journey. God says you'll have trouble. He says, I'll be with you in the trouble. But this is the foundation from which we journey all of this stuff. And there's lots of ways we come into struggles, and I would say there's practical answers to some of these things, all of it coming under and through a biblical worldview. But if the issue is overparenting, maybe we should do proper equipping of life. If the issue is a traumatic event, maybe find a counselor who specializes in trauma counseling. Now, this is really easy to say. Each of these things are big. They're big things to deal with. Poor diet, lack of sleep, like all of these things are big. And so for mental health, I do have an entire talk you can find, and I do have, actually have a few of my Your Story books. I wrote this with a friend of mine who's a psychologist and a pastor. This was before my breakdown, so it's good information, eating disorders, self-harm, depression, but it's not the body, mind, and soul. And I have a free book if you sign up for my newsletter on my website. I don't care if you sign up, get the free ebook, and then get rid of it, that's fine. But I wrote my breakdown in book form. And you might say, why? Because someone asked me to. They said, I've never heard a Christian's perspective on a breakdown before. And other than a pastor named Wayne Cordero, who wrote a book called Leading on Empty, I'd never heard one either. And so I wrote my journey, and then some of my friends and family, some of you might know the name Kerry Newhoff. He wrote his burnout breakdown story, and then my friends and family wrote theirs. My website, I have some cards on my table. They just look like this. I'm a curator. I'm not a blogger, so most of this isn't mine, but I collect the best stuff anywhere I can find. So it's all categorized. If you click blog, mental health, parenting, media, it's all there. And across the top is my social media. I said this, excuse me, I said to kids today, we need to fill our social media feeds with good stuff. Follow authors, follow pastors, follow organizations. So when you get home tonight and you're just going to spend a few minutes on something, fill it with good stuff. And I am doing parenting videos. I only have 6 on TikTok. I'm not dancing. It is just parenting, quick clips and snippets for it. But just realize if you're on TikTok, how many of you are on TikTok, by the way, as parents? Wow, very few. It's a really interesting place to be. But I would just say that TikTok has the most interesting algorithm because what you see on TikTok is who you are. Because it literally funnels you in. So what my most interesting story was a father who came up to me after. He said, Brad, I've been on TikTok for months, and all it shows me is half-naked women. Really? Because that's what you're watching. If you don't watch that, it will not give you more of that. I have all these talks online. Sex Talk is really made for you as a parent. This is not LGBTQ plus conversation gender. It is just, we need to talk to our kids about sex, like the most basic things. And the Sex Talk is a play on words. There's no such thing. It's a never, like it just begins when they're young and it never ends. My porn project, again, nothing graphic. Dating for Life is a talk. This is one called The Questions. You could actually show this to your kids. And I have 3 online courses. If your church has Right Now Media, these are all online. And my YouTube channel has 130 or 40 videos, and there's all kinds. This is the spanking one. You can find many others online. A couple things left. If you're a reader, this is every book I suggest in every category. I got accepted. I don't like this. It's called the Amazon Influencer Program. I'm like, I am not an influencer. But I think for whatever reason, I got accepted, and I love it because I can find the best books and just put them in and just leave them. Now, I've asked a lot of parents over the last few years with this talk, how do you feel now? And there's one word which is very consistent: unbelievably overwhelmed. Now, first off, parenting is overwhelming. But I think I've just put it all together in a package tonight where it's all just right in our face. So there's 3 ways I want to decrease that. One is my YouTube channel. Watch a video. Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, do better. Watch a video. Think of some way we can be better. My blog, go find some great YouTube, TED Talks, books, whatever else. And during COVID, I released a 3-year project. I think I'm just getting older, but I wanted to release one resource. So I had to fight with my board and other people, but I released a book which is 6 times bigger than anything I've ever released. It's 226,000 words. The goal was, though, a choose-your-own-adventure book for parents. The first 7 chapters are most of what we talked about tonight. There's a bit of family discipleship as well, but from mental health onward, everything, there's less parenting and more everyone. So I know many high school kids who now read that, 20-somethings who read it and can actually walk along with you. But it's everything from the foundations: mental health, engaging the culture, media, sex, porn, dating, finances, education, substance abuse. And I finished off with loneliness. And I have a bunch downstairs. People ask how they can help. Number 1, you can pray. My prayer team prays in a very unorthodox way. When I post setting up at your school this morning, I have people who prayed on 3 or 4 continents before I started speaking, and I love that. But you could just follow me on social media. We are trying to raise funds like every other not-for-profit. At the very bottom of my website or on the sheet outside, there's some of the projects we're looking at doing, and you can help promote. If you think tonight's useful, tell your pastor, tell another school or someone else. It's always helpful. 2 slides and we're done. So where do you start? I don't know about Calgary, but in Ontario, the night COVID shut down, I was actually at a concert, and I didn't even know if I should go. But it was the band for King and Country. And so my family's there, and he actually said, we're done. Like at midnight, we're going home. Like everything, the whole tour is canceled. I think they actually came from out your way a few days before. They have a song, if you don't know them, called Burn the Ships. But the song is Burn the Ships and Don't Look Back. If you don't know the analogy, settlers came over, burned their wooden ships to the ground so they couldn't go home. But what I love is that one line, and don't look back. Don't look back at all the things we've done wrong. We all, me included, as someone who speaks on parenting, has done and continue to do things that aren't great in parenting. But don't look back. Look forward at what we can do. I've ended almost all my talks for years with a quote from John Maxwell. John says, when you are challenged by any teacher, any preacher, anyone on anything, choose one thing. What is one thing I said tonight? And you went, I can do that. Family meals, family meetings. If those would be the big ones, I'd say are just easy to do. But here's what he says. Choose one thing, but here's the hardest thing. He says you have 3 days to do something about it. Today's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. By Friday night, if you haven't made a single move forward on anything we've talked about tonight, statistically, he says you never will. And so choose something and then walk forward in that. Now, I will say process is important. I process through exercise. I would go to a spin class, I'd go for a run or a bike, but in the next, and I know it's snowing out right now, but like maybe tomorrow, go for a walk with a spouse, with a friend. You might be overwhelmed with conversations tonight. Within a few days, though, you might go, that's what I want to start. Support each other as a school. For those of you in churches, it's really important to be together with parents, and I always say to parents, support the generation below you. I'm now trying to really support parents who are now have kids heading off to college, heading off to university, because I've just finished that. How do we help each other? In the book, The Power of Moments, it's talking about how moments matter. And I think our parenting, like our faith, is built in moments. And I really just pray that tonight was one of those moments. And I leave you with the quote that I said at the very beginning of the talk, which was, "They will not be with me forever, so I prepare them accordingly." So my challenge for you is very simply, so go prepare your kids accordingly. If you want to chat, I'm actually going to go down and I'll be by my booth the rest of the night. If you want to email me, I answer all my own emails. If you can keep me in your prayers, I head to Edmonton tomorrow, and I spend 2 days in Edmonton. I spend a day in Red Deer, and then I'm back in Calgary at Bonavista, I think it is. I forget the name. I'm at another church on Sunday afternoon, but just pray for my travels and my family as I'm away. Thank you so much for having me in, and I'll pass